Hey everybody, this is Alice Osborne, and we are celebrating March with Tim Reinhardt and Jesus' brother James. This is a comedic novel, and we're so happy to have Tim. He is one of our regular Wonderland book club members, and we're excited that he is here with us and in via Zoom, and hopefully we'll be in person very, very, very soon. We are a little bit about Tim. He's a veteran of the pharmaceutical industry. He's traveled the world, and he still travels a lot for his job, even in pandemic times last year, which scared me a little bit for my friend. His travels, coupled with an eventful childhood growing up in New York, excuse me, escaped his thought-provoking perspective on life. He enjoys writing comedies placed in dramatic settings because he likes the contrast. And if you get to know Tim, you'll understand that. He knows life can be challenging and thinks stories like these make the tough times a little bit easier. Ain't that the truth? He is the writer of the Academy Award-winning qualifying film Crackers, which starred Vincent D'Onofrio and Brenda Vaccaro, as well as the author of Afaq, I'm Trapped in India. That was his debut novel, which is now on audiobook. He's currently working on a film adaptation for Jesus' brother James. When he's not busy writing, he enjoys making films, playing tennis, and learning about history. He is intellectually curious. He currently resides in Holly Springs with his lovely wife April, daughter Anna Sophia, son Jacob, and rescue dog Faith. And Jesus' brother James is Tim's second novel. And it's available in bookstores all over North Carolina and beyond. Tim, take it away.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be here. I thought, and maybe this is because I'm a creature of the corporate world, I'll give a quick PowerPoint presentation, if that's okay, just to introduce you to myself. So I'll pull that up right now. Can you see that?
I can see it.
Everyone see it?
Hope everyone can.
As Alice mentioned, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for a while. I actually went to school in California. I grew up in New York, and went to school in California, did my undergraduate and graduate school out there. I'm actually a Russian history major at first, and then I went into science when I started working in the pharmaceutical industry. So I've always had a knack for writing. I always wanted to write a novel, and I actually did start writing a novel. And ironically enough, I've been working with Alice because it's going to be my third novel. I never finished it. It was something I had written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten again, accumulating thousands and thousands of pages, contacting editors and just not sure what I wanted to do. And I got into film. This is kind of an interesting story because it really influences my writing style. I had a friend. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I didn't want to pay for an editor. So Alice, you can close your ears right now. I didn't want to pay for an editor because I wasn't sure how good my book was. And a friend of mine, his wife teaches English, and she said, "I'll read your book," and which is actually not far from nothing, which is going to be my third novel. And she actually loved it, and her husband, who works for HBO Films, loved it as well, and asked me to write a screenplay for him. Ironically enough, there was a problem. I've never written a screenplay, so I said I haven't written a screenplay. I don't know what to do. He actually went into HBO archives and printed out a few scripts of. He was working on Boardwalk Empire at the time, and he printed some scripts out, and he basically just handed me the scripts and said, "This is my idea for a story." I'll skip on to that. He had a idea for a story about an Italian family that married an Irish family, and there was a lot of tension. The husband was older and his young Irish wife, and there was a lot of tension. And that was basically the idea of the story. And he asked me to write the screenplay. And as you can see on the left, I actually made it into the movie as an extra. I don't know if you're familiar. Vincent D'Onofrio is an actor. He's been in a bunch of things, including Full Metal Jacket. He was in Daredevil. I was supposed to be the priest, ironically enough, but on the right, his name is Frank. He was a big supporter of getting this film made, so we gave him he got the better shot, and he got the better wardrobe for this. But it was a great experience. And what happened with that experience is I built up my confidence in working in writing and working with these wonderful actors, to then go back to my novels and feel like I'm confident enough to write. So working with these folks on set, having them read my dialogue, critique it, tell me what was good, what was bad, it really catapulted me. And since then, I've written 2 novels, and I've gone back and rewritten my 3rd novel. I'm going to stop the presentation at this point, because the next step is the book that you've read, Jesus' Brother James, a little bit of history about me and why. I know that some of you may say this is a really strange kind of story. In growing up in New York, I actually grew up north of the city in the Hudson Valley, and I grew up near a monastery called Mount St. Alphonsus, where it was a school for brothers who become priests. They were going to become Redemptorist priests, and that's obviously a very, very serious commitment. And I used to spend my years going up there to play basketball with them, and tennis, and go fishing, go swimming, play hockey. And also they used to sit around and talk theology, which was an interesting experience, to sit around with dozens of brothers talking about complex theological questions. And I was always amazed at the different type of conversation you would have with these folks, and how complicated some of the issues were, and the rich history for all these discussions. But also, if you watch TV, or if you look at films, priests are always portrayed in kind of a very bland way. And I never experienced that. I always experienced the very diverse, complex, emotional issues that they really had to deal with. So I think the story was always kind of seeded in me. And it was sparked in Copenhagen when I was traveling. I have a crazy colleague from Sweden, and we were in a t-shirt shop, and he was fascinated by a t-shirt, and had a picture of the devil on it, and it said, "God is busy, can I help you?" And I'm not sure why he was so fascinated with this t-shirt, but it kind of gave me an idea of, as a comedy, you call for help and you don't get the help that you think you should get. And then I fell back and started thinking about it, and having, spent so much time researching and doing theological. Most people don't know, James. James is a very complex and mysterious character as well. In the Catholic Church, he's not really the brother James, because I won't go into all this complexity, but he's a stepbrother or cousin, or various other things, even though some people would argue he is the brother James. So he's a very complex character to begin with. So that's where I come up with the idea of, somebody asks for help, but they don't get the help they think, and they get someone else. So that's kind of a little bit of the backstory, the history. And Alice, a little later, I have a film clip, because I still, ever since I worked on Crackers, I've fallen in love with filmmaking, and I try to make films. Every book I make, or any story I write, I talk to local filmmakers, and we had started making a film adaptation of Jesus' Brother James, and it was stopped. But we made about 5 minutes, so it's a 2-scene. If you read the book, it's a scene that takes place between Father Coady, who's a major character, and Amber, who is another. There are 4 major characters in the book. Amber is a career-oriented, driven corporate person who's a little bit frustrated with her life. Part of that frustration is her boyfriend, Paul, who's kind of a self-centered, just a very egotistical person. Father Coady is a priest who's coming back from the Iraq War, where he served as a chaplain, and he's struggling to fit back in society. And then there's Michael, who's basically his life is just falling apart. So those are the four main characters. But the scene was really just Father Coady and Amber. So I'll show you a little clip when we get to a point, Alice, where you think it's suitable. And that's good for me because I'd rather show the clip than read. So
Jim, why don't you show it now, since you did
okay.
such a wonderful setup?
Okay, is that enough backstory? If you've read the book, I hope, and actually I give speeches because I do screenwriting and novel writing, and a popular topic is what's the difference between screenwriting and novel writing. And I actually give a little presentation, and I show this, and I show the chapter so that folks can actually see the difference. So I'm going to show that right now, if I can find it. Okay, give me 1 second, Alice. Sorry for the delay. It closed out on me, and it takes me a little bit to get back into Vimeo where I store my videos. So here we go. Is it coming across, Alice? Can you hear the sound?
Yes, it's coming across. It's working.
That handsome guy over there staring at you. You noticed. Is Paul coming to your birthday tonight? Nope. He's still in New York. That sucks. Screw him. Do you mind if I sit here?
Always enjoy meeting new people.
Are you in the military?
I served a term in Iraq.
Thank you for your service. My name's Amber.
Coady. Amber's beautiful name.
The priest. No shit.
Why can't I talk to women under 50? Huh? Why is it that only old women come to mass?
What? Hello again.
Hello?
You'll have to excuse my behavior in there. I've just had a little too much
It's quite all right. I'm used to forgiving people.
Well, then you'll just have to keep on forgiving me. I'm still having sinful thoughts. I hope my Uber gets here soon.
I can wait here with you if you like.
That'd be nice. I'll give you some time to decide
Decide what?
whether or not you're going to get in the car with me. Do you know what the best way to get rid of temptation is?
No.
Give into it.
Are you Amber?
Is she coming with us? Last chance. It's my birthday.
So
Wait.
that is the start of our, that was the first two scenes we were going to make from the movie. And just so you're aware that this is all filmed locally. The Father Coady character is played by Stephen Roten, who directed the film as well. He's the director of theater at Meredith here in Raleigh, and his wife actually plays Amber. So we were lucky that I have two neighbors that are great. It's amazing to have actors read your dialogue. It's just it's hard to explain how nice that is. But anyway, that was the film. It was stopped, but we had a bit of that. We had talked about maybe getting back together, but now I'm working on my third novel, and actually Stephen is much more excited about the third novel than this one, which I'm not sure why. Maybe Alice knows. She's read part of my third novel, why it's exciting. But anyway, I'm going to open it up because I thought it might be better than just reading something, but you get a flavor for that. And if you want to send me a message offline or if you want to bring up some of the differences between the film scene and the book scene, because it's very, very different. But anyway, I'll turn it over to questions.
Yeah, or if you want to ask a question in the chat and then have me ask the question, or we're only 12 of us, so it's a good number that we can ask our questions. Who would like to be the first person? Okay, so I will be the first person. Tim, what made you decide to use omniscient point of view instead of perhaps using 4 different point of views, like limited? So have only Pauls, have only Fathers, have only Ambers, or have only Mikes, rather than mixing everybody up with an eagle point of view.
Yeah, I thought that I thought the conflict, it was better to understand the conflicts that were going on from the different points of view, and to try and to humanize the flaws, because all these characters are extremely flawed, to understand their flaws. So it's not just silly flaws, but to hopefully build empathy with the characters, because as I mentioned, some of the flaws are pretty big, and so if you don't, I felt that if you didn't approach it from their point of view, then you may not have empathy for them, and you may start judging them in a very harsh way. So I was hoping that, and then that would lead to comedy. A little bit about myself too is, I grew up in the 70s with comedies like Sanford and Son and Chico and the Man, and shows that had a lot of people who were flawed, and in tough situations. And I think that really influenced me. I like the comedies of the 70s much more than the comedies of the 80s, where, like Family Ties. In fact, they seem much more, Hollywoodish, whereas the 70s, it seemed like they're real raw and flawed characters. But I thought that was really funny. Because if you met someone like Fred Sanford, you'd be like, wow, that person's really obnoxious. But if you watch the show, you have sympathy for them, and you grow to like them. So I thought the point of view was very important, and especially for a book like this, as I mentioned, to have a lead character that's a priest, that's very tormented, is a hard subject to write on. And if you're not writing it from their point of view, I also enjoy it. The character of Amber is actually based on a lot of issues that I've had in the corporate world. And it was fun to write her character forgetting gender and just trying to put it down to, a person struggling in a very harsh environment, or, callous environment. So, and still try to be funny.
One of my favorite lines, Tim, was when Paul is saying to Amber, I've been there and you're a slave because you're a worker bee. They've tried to, they passed you over for a promotion. They've taken someone from outside. They took Tina from outside, and they don't value you, and you're not valued because your boss Steve keeps Skitter, right? Keeps coming
Skitter.
late to all your meetings. And that was one of my favorite portions of the book, is when she confronts him, and then she realized, she makes the connection between her father and herself, and how that was really heartbreaking, that she gave all her, she sold all her stuff so that she could make money. And it kind of triples, or I guess catapults back to selling the Rob Thomas. Rob Thomas is one of my favorites, by the way. I've met Rob Thomas like 5-6 times, and I've gotten his autograph. I didn't have to pay $500 for it.
That's funny, because there's when I was writing the story, there's a female colleague of mine, and she told all these Rob Thomas, because I would ask her questions about, obviously I'm writing a story from a female perspective, and she would give me feedback, and she was completely enamored of. And I think there's a story, and I hate to say this, 'cause I'm writing this other novel now, but I think from the story, there's a story about how she goes away and she does this trip, and she tells a story about going to Rob Thomas concert. But that's actually true from a colleague of mine, who basically had made this crazy trip so she could see him in concert. And actually, I think met him, like before the concert, after, where they were pushing through the crowd. So
Yeah, it's I've been a fan since 1998 of Rob Thomas, and of course he was born February 14th, 1972. Everyone knows that. And his real name is Robert Kelly Thomas.
I didn't know that
He's
much
actually
about Rob
Irish, but
Thomas.
anyway, I don't know a lot about him or anything. But going back, that was what I liked, the parallels between what Paul was telling Amber, and then how Amber, was self-aware enough to figure that out with her father, and how she was becoming her father, and then at the end, selling her stuff, which was the freedom that Paul kept talking about the whole time. So materialism, and then how that was a big factor in the book. If you wanted to talk a little bit about that, that's another theme. A big theme of your book is letting go, and that's the values that James espouses, I believe, of letting go of what we're holding on to, and what are we a slave to.
Yeah, and I think that the materialism is a big question, and James' approach to that makes all the characters think about either materialism or selfishness, and they have to kind of step back and say, maybe some of our problems are based on some of those issues. So yeah, so materialism, and there's actually a chapter. I was on a podcast with Charlie Lovett, and there's a chapter. I have a bookmark, I can't remember, but it's basically talking about old beliefs in the modern world, and he liked the title of that chapter because, that's kind of a, you have these, be good and give your things away and be charitable and all these other, and then it's against the, well, I need to have a corporate job, I need a car, I want a fancier car, and some of the characters are caught, and definitely Amber is caught in that cycle. She wants to be successful and wants these things, but what is she sacrificing?
Alice had a question about how do you envision Mike on the screen physically and his van? And it's in the chat.
That's a great question. We actually had screened for the film, and one of Alice actually be interesting here offline, because we get a lot of comments during the little lectures I give about the characters, and when you film, it's always hard to picture or pick someone who is and Mike is a very, very hard person to pick. Because Mike is one person, picture somebody in high school who's the best looking guy in high school, has got gray hair, and they've let themselves go. And so you have to have somebody who looks really pathetic, kind of like me with no hair, and or maybe balding, and has a little bit of hair because he doesn't want to let it go, out of shape. But at the same time, underneath that, he has to be a good looking guy, because people have to say, oh, well, he was good looking at one time. So we actually had somebody picked out. He's an actor who, unfortunately, one of the reasons we filmed the scene with Coady and Amber was because our Mike took off and got a job in New York. And so, but picture somebody, a little husky, little, worn, life worn him down, and his hair is still there a little bit underneath, and but yeah, husky, balding guy, but looks worn for life. The van is we wanted to film the scene with the van because Stephen and I love just, if you haven't read the book, the scene we're talking about here is that Mike is having trouble with his wife, and it's at Christmas time, and he's basically living in his minivan, which is full with Christmas presents. And so there's, Happy Meals and car seats, and it's just a very kind of a contrast of the spirit of the holidays versus the real tough time he's in. And so there's the scene where he's thinking about committing suicide, and he's sitting in the van, he's eating stale French fries, and he's drinking apple juice from his child's sippy cup, and he's got a gun, thinking about shooting himself. So that was a hard one. We were looking for like a minivan that's just really beat up, but it can't be too old, right? So it has to be, so we were calling all of our friends that have small kids. And so we were thinking about like a Chrysler, what are they called? Caravan, I think. And we had a friend who had one that just looked like it had been beat up, and somebody was using it for like a home cleaning service. And it was a emerald green, but it had little patches of where they had fixed the dent and things, and one of the bumpers was hanging off. So that was what we had pictured for the van. But that's good, because that's one of my favorite scenes, and that's one we wanted to film. But it's very complicated filming. Once you bring a gun into a scene, then you have to call the local police, and you have to get special permits, and then the actors have to go through a whole routine, even though the gun could be fake, to make sure that everyone's aware there's a gun on set. And blah, blah, blah. So, but I love that scene. So I hope someday we film it. It'd be a really good scene.
Any other questions for Tim? Dory, go ahead.
Hey, Tim, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I read his book. I read Tim's book several months ago. I think it was maybe last summer, late last summer. And it was really funny. And I wanted to share that I did like how you presented Father Coady and Christianity, that it didn't matter if you weren't Catholic. If you were brought up in a different form of Christianity, it was all relatable. So it wasn't too pigeonholed into Catholicism, which is, obviously, you probably did that on purpose. But I did want to say that I've always wondered, it's interesting how you brought in your background with how you would fellowship, for lack of a better word, with the brothers in the Hudson Valley. And I have always thought about priests and wondered, aside from some of the more horrible things that we hear about priests, but I think probably most of them are not like that, and just how much they must struggle with being a man and having to abide by these extremely stringent rules that go against being a man. And I think that you presented Father Coady really well. As a woman, it's always funny when you see like a hot priest, we might see a really good looking priest and we're like, oh my, what a waste. But I like how you presented Father Coady as, he was supposed to be, attractive, but he was just really struggling with his humanity and his vows, and just how challenging that must be. And I guess I was really wondering, did any of the priests that you talked to, or the brothers that you talked to, share with you any of their thoughts about stuff like that they struggled with, not going to be having a wife, or not a family, or not being able to be intimate and things like that? Did they ever share anything like that with you?
Yeah, and thanks for saying I wrote the priest well, because that was a major goal. Father Coady is actually based on several different brothers that I knew. Brother Coady, actually, at the time I was in New York, he didn't make it. He fell in love with someone. He dropped out of the priesthood and became a teacher or something. I can't remember. We lost track over the years. But so the name Coady comes from someone who actually didn't become a priest for that reason. Another priest, his name was Father Pete, actually did become a priest, and he went over to Iraq, and he was a chaplain. So that is based on, that part of the priest is based on my dealings with Father Pete. And it's really about everything from a priest standpoint. It's a very complex life. They have a very, and Redemptorist priest, if you don't know from a Catholic standpoint, is a very disciplined order of the priesthood, and they take a vow of poverty, and they do various things. So it's even more serious than others. Even for him to become a chaplain was a very challenging. He had to be persistent. He had to do it for several years in order to go over. And then when he went to be chaplain in Iraq, there were a lot of restrictions, because obviously, if you're being a chaplain, there's sensitivity about not only the various sects of Christianity, but then non-Christians who are in the military, even atheists or agnostics who may want some type of counseling. And then when you come back, obviously, to the world of the traditional fellowship in your parish, you have other things to deal with. People could be arguing about which pew they sit in, and the things we argue about every day. And can you imagine being counseling people in Iraq, and 2 weeks later you're sitting in a church hearing things like this? And that's what I try to convey in a humorous sense, because I try not to judge the characters too much. I just let them live their lives in the book. But I really wanted people, and to Alice's point, I wanted people to empathize that, hey, this priest is kissing someone, but he has flaws and he has issues, but he's human, and so that was important. So Dora, I'm glad that you think and I have to comment from the Catholic standpoint is, and when I went away to college, I mean, I grew up in New York, but my community was really all Catholics. So I didn't have a lot of interactions per se. I mean, I did, but my world was really Catholicism. And I went to California to school, and so I filled out the application and I checked Christian, and I get in, and my roommate, the first thing he says was, "You're not Christian, you're Catholic." So it was kind of an interesting, wake up call. And then he said, "Well, do you know the Bible? Because Catholics don't read the Bible." And I had spent the last 4 or 5 years, as I said, deeply immersed in all these things that the brothers and I had studied. So that was another stereotype that I thought was funny, that, well, Catholics don't read the Bible. So yeah, it was definitely, it was a conscious thing to say, look, it's universal, and some of these things are across the board. So it was interesting. So yeah, but thank you. It was fun for me to give a voice to the priest. And one other thing, the scene with Amber in the bar there, now that was rewritten, just a spoiler. She does not kiss him in the book, in that bar scene. So, but that's the difference between a book and a movie. You can go a little slower in a book, right? You can take your time, you can kind of draw things out. I studied Russian, and Russian novels are the epitome of drawn out stories. But Amber is actually a character. Well, that scene is based on my wedding, because the priest, Father Pete, who married my wife and I don't know if it was the alcohol or what, but there were a couple women at my wedding who were they were really interested in Father Pete, and he drinks and smokes, and so all those are true. So it's all based on that. But yeah, it's based on my wedding, actually, that some of the women were hitting on the priest. So it was very interesting. A lot of my comedy comes from real life, so I'm not that creative. I have to either see it or experience it in some way to put it in the story.
Tim, you have a couple of questions from Alice in the chat. Number one, do you know Bart Ehrman, and the book reads as a film? Go ahead and.
That's very perceptive. Well, Alice, you're gonna get an award for great questions. The first of Anne, and now this one. Actually, Bart and I communicate through email. So when I was writing the book, it had been years since, I must admit, I joined his podcast and his blog. He's actually a professor. Those of you who don't know, Bart is a professor of early Christian studies at UNC Chapel Hill. And I met him actually at McIntyre's at a book signing, and he thought I was a little odd. So, because I would always ask questions, and he's like, "Wow, I haven't heard those type of questions before." And so I emailed him saying I'm writing a comedy about James, Jesus' brother, and he actually sent me several books to read. And then, for those of you who've read, there's also Aramaic. So I didn't talk about this yet, but one of the comedic vehicles in this book is that this person Mike, who wants to die because his life is so awful, is introduced to James, who the priest says is Jesus' brother, but he only speaks Aramaic because Jesus only spoke Aramaic. And so I think I actually thanked Bart in the acknowledgments, because he sent me books and suggestions. He was a really nice guy, because if you just think about a professor going, "You're writing a comedy about James," that's kind of strange. But he was great. He was really great, and he gave me a couple books. One of the books is actually, it's on my shelf over here. It's called James the Just, because that was his name. And I read a couple books on James. The one thing, though, is I didn't get too much into the earlier versions. I started getting into a lot of the theology, and I thought I got in the way of the comedy, so I kind of cleaned it out. I don't know if that was good or not, but yeah. So I read all that and kind of refreshed myself on James before, because even it's a mystery exactly what happened to him. Because as you know, I won't get into the history, but if, you know, he disappears, and there's different theories on exactly what happens to him. The book, yeah. So you bring up another good point. Does the book, did you have that when I wrote it? One of the things I left out when I talked about my first version of my first novel, which is now going to be my third novel. I feel like I'm writing Star Wars. You know, the first book is actually going to be the third book. It's called Not Far From Nothing. It's a great book, I think, I hope, who knows. But it was thousands and thousands of pages, and I would get lost, and I'd have outlines, and I'd write things, and then I'd, oh, wait, that character's terrible. Now I've got to go rewrite all these other things. So when I wrote the screenplay for Crackers, I thought this is a great way to write an outline, because then there's a voice for my characters. And a good example of that is when I wrote Jesus' Brother James, the Amber character was not really, it was kind of a side character for humor. Oh, you know, the priest falls in love with this woman, and that's it, you know. And then when I started writing the screenplay, I thought, no, I really like this Amber character. And I think actually even Alice, when she read an earlier version, said, no, you need to increase her page presence. And I can do that much faster on a screenplay. So I write all my books now in a screenplay format, and that's my outline. And then I look at it, and if I want to change things around. So it's you probably can tell with some of my books that, you know, it was really written with that in mind. And then what I try to do, I call it the Christmas tree structure. I try to go back and I add detail, you know, like you're putting ornaments on a tree. But again, maybe it's because I've read so many Russian novels in my past. I don't want to put too many ornaments on the tree, on one's branch or another branch, because then it kind of weighs it down. And that's how I put things together when I write. So yeah, so I did have it in mind. And I'm very visual. I actually, in the chat, I put an article that I wrote for the Charlotte podcast about, you know, how I think screenwriting has really helped my novel writing. Because the other thing about filming and then going back and writing again is I feel like I'm a camera. And so when I'm trying to get a mood, I feel like, I know this sounds strange, I feel like I'm the camera and I'm moving through, and then what I try to do, I try to add on top of that, saying, well, what can I do? Or almost like a silent film where they could put extra little words in and things. I'd use a visual to help me there too. So filmmaking has really influenced my writing to try and portray those. So to be as visual as I can. But thanks, that's a great question.
It comes through. That comes through in your writing, because the reader ends up being visual as well. I mean, you can see the scenes almost.
Yeah, thanks. And there are scenes, and I try to mix it with the meaning of the story. You know, Mike, and I don't want to go, if you haven't read, I won't go through too many of the spoilers, but there's a part of the story where Mike is, you know, really on the ledge, let's say, right. Really dangling. And so, you know, that film part of my mind said, what's the craziest, you know, metaphorical scene I can make with him dangling? And that's where that comes from. So that's actually, that helps me too.
That's good.
Yeah, but that's great. Do you read Bart, or do you read his blog or his podcast or anything?
Excuse me. I read a couple of his books some years ago.
Okay.
I've forgotten how I found them, as a matter of fact. But some of his books that he wrote around 2000, you know, some of the earlier books, I haven't read in recent years, but I did follow his career for a while. As I understand it, you probably know this, I'm not sure I'm correct in this, but he went to, I think, Princeton Seminary. He went to seminary planning to be a minister, if not a priest. And started writing, starting looking at what I would call the historical Jesus. And I think as a result of that inquiry and that study, concluded, and this is oversimplifying things, but he concluded that Jesus was one of the apocalyptic characters at the time, and that there were many, excuse my voice, and that he then became less Christian or perhaps agnostic. So I don't know what his later books are like. I imagine them more historical than they are theological, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, his books are really historical. They go back and they, I don't want to bore everyone because history is boring. I know because I have a master's in history. But they really go into the sources and they go into archaeology, and he writes a lot about, I think one of his latest books is the concept of heaven and hell, how far back in books and theology. And then in the Middle East, obviously you have to take, what are the other communities think, and are there crossing of certain ideas and things. So yeah, he's really turned into a historian. He actually he does a blog, and he actually does lectures on Zoom every Sunday. So, but it's all historical stuff now.
Yeah.
No theology. And you're right, he did go to Princeton. He has a PhD from Princeton.
Hey, Tim, can I ask my question now?
Let me guess what it is.
Yeah, I'll give you 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count. So, but other than that question, I really, what a ride. I was laughing, I was cringing, I've not read a book like this, and it was so much fun. And
I'm glad. That was the purpose of it. It's I know it's, and Stephen was saying that maybe I should have given the book a different title, because some people do get confused at it, and when they think, they don't think it's a comedy. But I'm glad that was the whole point of the book, is that people would have fun.
yeah, and I have to say, as someone who grew up Catholic, has 2 aunts who are nuns, went to an undergrad and graduate Catholic university and college, respectively, I really appreciated the priest part. And it's funny, as I was reading this, I'm like, I feel like I'm back in college when I'm reading these people, and the talking and thinking about Catholicism, and not just what you see in the headlines now. And to me, also as a Yankee, the northern, or the Catholic Church I grew up with, is different than what's down here. And so just, I really appreciated that connection with Father Coady, and just being around enough priests in my life, that understanding that, yeah, it's difficult for them. So I appreciated that. And then also I went to your opening at the theater. I can't remember which theater you had in Raleigh.
The Alamo.
Yeah, the Alamo, and got to meet Stephen, and I can't remember her name.
Tomorrow.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was a thrill, and it was fun to see the clip again. I was hoping you were able to film some more, but I guess not, with COVID and different projects and stuff. But
yeah, I love making film.
yeah.
But everybody who writes, I know several of you write on this call, be thankful that it's much easier to write than it is to make a film, because everything. And it's funny now, because people will tell me, oh, and there are people on the internet that say continuity, or like Game of Thrones, the coffee cup was on the set. There are just so many things that you have to think about with filming. The actors, the makeup, the lighting, the sets, the location, the weather, and then the cost. It's free for me to go to my computer and start typing.
Yeah.
But you have to pay the actors, right? You have to pay the makeup people, you have to pay the director, and you have, so to film, I love it. It's great, but it's harder to kind of fit it. And then you have to get the time.
Yeah.
So as far as I was going to give you a cop out. I was thinking of this, and I was watching, ironically enough, serendipity. I was watching a show the other day about Tiger Woods, and they asked him a question. They said, which is your favorite club in the bag? And he said, look, if I didn't like the club, it wouldn't be in my bag. So I was going to give you that answer, saying if I didn't like a sentence, it wouldn't be in my book. But that sounds like a cop out. I don't really have a favorite, but there's a chapter title that says Modern Man in Old World Beliefs. And I was on a podcast with Charlie Lovett, and that's the chapter heading that I was referring to earlier. We had a long discussion about that, about it's, we struggle, like we're talking about the different, theological concepts and everything, right? You're trying to take all these different concepts and come up with, your own self-guidance. So, and that's what that chapter was about, is, how do they figure out what's right or wrong? And maybe there isn't a right or wrong, zero-sum game. The more time I spend at work, the less time I spend with my family. You have all these different things pulling. And so Charlie really was nice about that chapter heading. And I think, when I started the book, I was in the corporate world, and, I had kids, and it was such a challenge to try and balance everything. And it reminded me, I worked at Pfizer, for those, I don't know if I mentioned that, but so it's a big corporation, right? And they would come up with these slogans like, work-life balance. And what does that mean? And it's trying to figure out what that means, is when you get the work-life balance, and probably you never get the balance. It's kind of a constant struggle. So I would say that that's my favorite word, because it had such a resonance with Charlie, and he's such a great. I don't know if anyone knows him. I can't remember his books now, but he's written a couple books. He's actually a rare bookseller for years, and then he wrote these books. And the new one's coming out. He lives in Winston-Salem. I don't know, Alice, if he put his name up there, but he's a great guy, great podcast. And that was really influenced me, that it had such a dramatic effect on him. Kind of like Dory, when you mentioned the priest, when you try to communicate something to people and it connects, that it's great. It worked. They understood what I was trying to say. So that's my favorite, not sentence, but my favorite title.
No, I guess it's close enough.
It's close. I have my homework. I'll go back and I'll send you an email. This is my favorite.
I don't know if everybody noticed, though, in the film, though, Tim has his cameo. He was the Uber driver.
Yeah, did everyone notice that?
You have to point that out. That oh, and you had a line.
It was funny because when I filmed, and I don't know how many people know, Vincent D'Onofrio, but in the film world, he's has like this cult following, that people are like, they just love Vincent. I mean, I was never, I knew who he was. I'd seen him in Full Metal Jacket. He was in Men in Black. And so I get on the set and I'm all excited. And I kept talking to the director saying, I don't have a line. I have to have a line. And so when Stephen and I met, I said, I'm going to be in the movie and I'm going to have a line. So my line is, are you Amber? And so, and the funny part is I messed it up a bunch of times because they have a camera. And so again, with filming, you don't have to worry about this as an author. There's a spot I have to hit. So I have to drive up, and it seems simple in the movie. You're probably thinking, oh, that's just a silly little scene. But for me to pull my car up and then I have to lean over, so I have to be exactly in the right spot. And it took, I don't know, 7 takes just for me to get to the right spot with the lighting in the right way. And for me, and then one of the times, it wasn't even my fault. One of the production assistants was leaning on my car, and like my alarm started going off. And Steven started yelling at me. He's like, you have one simple thing, just drive up and say this line. So, but yeah, I got in. So I won in the end. I was a producer. I could do whatever I want.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely Oscar worthy, Tim, for sure.
Thank you. Well, it's funny because when I don't know how everyone else would answer this question. I don't know how you evaluate your dialogue. But to have Stephen tomorrow, actors like that, to read my dialogue, it's really fantastic. And it really makes you feel pathetic, because when you read your own dialogue to them, they're like, oh, you're awful. And then they'll take the page and they'll start reading the dialogue, and they'll give it life, and they'll put accents, and they'll do all these things. And you're like, wow, you're so dynamic and you're so charismatic. And so they made fun of me, like, you can't be in the film but I'm like, Stan Lee was in all those movies. I'm going to be in all my movies from now on. I don't care. So can you write that down, Tracy, saying you were really good?
Yeah.
So that when I argue with Steven, I get another part.
All the clout I have in the film industry.
Yeah. So I really push to get it. I think I guess it's my vanity. I have to be in my film. So I'm even talking about that now. I have my new novel is not Far From Nothing, is a coming of age story. So most of the characters are young. So I'm like, I'm talking to Steven saying, look, I could be a guy in the bar or something, but I'm gonna have a line. So I'm trying to figure that out. Alice, you can help me out. Like, what character can I be in the?
You can be the father.
Yeah, I could. Well, yeah, I don't fit the description of the father, but I could figure it out.
Yeah, you could be the father. Paget has a question for you, Tim.
So the question
is, yeah, you see it in the chat.
I see it in the chat. Actually, no, it's the opposite. It's not difficult for me. It's actually, it's refreshing. I tend to be a little melancholy when it comes to writing. And it's funny because I used to have a English professor friend who used to say the same thing. You read something, you're like, oh, that's garbage. And so it's really easy to get down on your own writing. Especially, I think part of it is I love, certain authors, Dickens and Tolstoy, and then you read their writing and then you read your own, you're like, oh gosh, that's not Tolstoy. Well, maybe that's a good thing.
And it's difficult not getting instant feedback too, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, if you read the article, that's one of the best things when you're melancholy about your own writing and you go into a theater and you write something, or actually, I'll give you a better example. We were filming Crackers, and so just think about this. Vincent D'Onofrio, Brenda Vaccaro, who has Emmys, I don't know, she may even have an Oscar. They're reading my stuff, and I'm like, wow, this is really scary. And so I'll never forget, we were on the set, and Vincent, but I must admit, they were doing some improv too. So they were taking my writing and they were modifying it. And they were laughing on the set so loud that they had to clear the set. And the director came over and apologized because he kicked me off the set. And I'm like, it was worth it to hear all those people laughing at the lines that we worked on, to go into a theater and sit there in the dark and hear people laugh at your comedies, or even when people get upset if they don't like it. Any reaction from me is fine, because like I have reviews on Amazon and stuff, and it's great, but it's not the same as that spontaneous reaction. It's really, really great. And so it kind of revitalized. It's like a battery charger. It really kind of sends a bolt. Sometime when I'm having problems, I'll invite Steven and Tamara over and I'll say, hey, can you read this scene? And we'll have some wine, and they may even make fun of it, say this is terrible, or it doesn't make sense, and it just adds a little bit of, I think, because as a writer, sometimes you can be a little arrogant. And so I like to be a little humble and say, am I accomplishing what I'm trying to accomplish? So for me, it's great. And like I said, the other thing is I tend to get wordy. And so sometimes I'll write a chapter and it's just really thick or really just off on a tangent. And, when I go back to writing a screenplay, I'll think, wow, that chapter just didn't move. Or, to Alice's point of, if you're writing a screenplay, you have to imagine someone sitting and watching this. And so I picture somebody sitting and reading my chapter and going, they're not going to read this. And so I try to change it up. So it really helps me. I don't think I would have finished my first novel if it wasn't for screenwriting, which is ironic. The other funny thing is that I went to a San Diego Film Festival, and I'm sitting with all these, folks who had gone to film school, and they're like, "Where'd you go to film school?" I said, "Why did you go to film school?" So it's kind of, I wish I would have in some ways, but maybe it's better that it didn't. I just came in with, tabula rasa. I was a blank slate and just went for it. But it was fun, and it really helps me. Also, I use a software called Final Draft, which basically, when you write, it helps you write quickly. I don't know if everyone else has this issue, but sometimes I'll have an idea in my head, I can't get it down fast enough. And to be able to write a scene very quickly is a lifesaver. And that software really helps me to do that. So it really helps me structure everything. So yeah, I love going back and forth. The other thing, camaraderie. My filmmaking friends, I sit twice a month. We have screenwriting, and we just put 10 pages of a screenplay up, and everyone reads it and gives feedback. And those are very animated and lively sessions. With novels, it's harder to give 10 pages of a novel to somebody and have an animated discussion with 15 people. So I think that's helpful too.
Cool, Tim. So now's a good time to do our group picture. So if your screen's not on, put it on if you'd like to be in the group picture. And big smiles. Okay, well done, well done. And I got a picture of you laughing earlier, Tim, so you're all set. Tracy, you had something to share that I don't think you had a chance to share when it was your turn to speak about your coaching.
Oh, that's fine. This is a shortened.
No, go ahead, because you could use that time when you were asking the question.
Oh, okay. Really quickly, I'm just offering life coaching with a focus for authors. If you know of anybody who, I'm just using my counseling degree, but it's not really going to be therapy, but just since I understand what it's like to be an author, or if you know somebody who's a teacher or a counselor, I'm just offering life coaching sessions. So the end.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Allison.
You're welcome. And don't forget to get Tracy's book at Quail Ridge. That she's our September author. So, and don't forget to get Dory's book either, because she's our July author. Is that all the authors we've got? We've got 3 authors. Yay! That's pretty awesome on the call. And Paget's books too are also at Quail Ridge. Isn't that right, Paget? No, not yet.
I don't have anything at Quail. No. I will have a book coming out in the summer or fall after publishing, self-publishing 5 books. I have a publisher who is going to my first young adult novel called The Summer the Air Changed. And I will keep you all posted.
And I have a poetry book that's going to be coming out in a couple months or so.
Awesome. If you're on meetup.com, there's nothing stopping you guys from posting stuff on Meetup and then just putting it out there. Or if you want me to talk about what's going on with you, like Tracy did right before the meeting, so that it's a reminder. And Alice has done that too. So
Thank you.
We're a community, and you just have to let me know, because the meetings, it's a little bit of a different format, obviously. Okay, so that was our intermission, our little sponsored Phil stuff, which is important. Other questions for Tim about characters, about situations, about stuff and Dory, you go ahead.
I had a question that came to mind when Tim was talking about writing the screenplay, and I understand that you have done an audiobook for one of your books, or was it this one?
Yeah, I did an audio version of Afaq, I'm Trapped in India. So my first book is a comedic book about a pharmaceutical exec who wakes up in India. He doesn't have any memory, and the police are after him, and the only person he knows is this crazy person, and the person's name is Afaq. So I did audiobook.
So with your experience with an audiobook, I know I've done one audiobook, and it was a very surreal experience to, like you have talked about with your dialogue and, actors reading your words. It was a very surreal experience for me to do an audiobook and listen to somebody else read my words. How different was it for you to have someone read your words in audiobook format versus having somebody read your dialogue as a screenwriter? Like, was it different for you, or did you feel like it was similar, or am I losing my mind and what I'm saying doesn't make any sense?
Oh, no, it's harder to listen to somebody read an audiobook. I started my audiobook years ago with an actor, and I was like, it's going to be too expensive. So I had a voiceover person that I work with in the industry do it, and it was very challenging. Well, first of all, humor, and my humor, obviously, anybody who's looked at my books, it's raw, right? It's real situations with people. It's not, like I said, it's not facts of life or, things that are, kind of standard. It's a little out there. So like the book Afaq is about a person who's in India. So there's a Pakistani character, there are Indian characters, and it was really hard to listen. And I had to actually pull the audio person back saying, you need to cut down on the accents. It's coming across as, condescending. It wasn't meant, the book's not meant to be condescending. It's about chaos. If you go to India and you try to get across the street, it's chaotic. But again, I don't want judgment in my books. It's just, that's the world that's there and that's what exists. And so it was a very challenging to hear my book being read. Maybe if I would have had better, professional actor who could walk that line. I have listened to books, and there are some famous actors who do great jobs inflecting and doing different voices and things. But it was really, really tough to listen to. And even now, I kind of just let it go and said, okay, let's get the audiobook out there and see what the reaction is. We could always pull it. But yeah, it was and that was the hardest part, is setting the tone in the book with the voice that I wanted to set. So hopefully, and in the film, it's easier, because in the film, you can have the person doing things. You could have visual, like, hints or visual collaboration with the tone. The lighting and the tone, the pace of the filming. You can do other things to supplement it. When it's just an audiobook, it stands on its own. And so it's really hard I think it's really hard. And if you listen to, I listen to audiobook. I don't know if anyone joined Libro. Libro is an audiobook. It's like audible.com, except the money, you can donate some of your membership to independent bookstores. And so I listen to a lot of books on audio, and some of the actors are fantastic and they do a great job, and other people, they just don't convey the tone of the book. I think it's a very, very challenging thing. I haven't heard yours. I know you mentioned that you had yours put on audio, and actually I think I sent you a message about that. But I went the cheap route. I had somebody who was doing it very inexpensively. So I just wanted my book out on audio. I have an approach about Jesus Brother James, but that's another, I think it's a very challenging book to read on audio, again, because, I don't want to set the wrong tone.
Tim, Mariana has a question for you.
Okay.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm enjoying this. I enjoyed your book, and I have a question. I know little about humor. I enjoy humor. And I wonder, and I don't know if I can even phrase this properly. What is your philosophy of humor? How does someone who write humor develop their way of delivering it? What out there is helping you? Why did you choose humor in the first place? And what is your philosophy of humor when you write your books? What kind of things do you hold on to when you develop this? Does that make sense?
It does. My first novel was very dark, actually, and this is ironic that I've had, I don't know, I guess I'm just lucky. I did my ancestry in me. I'm 39% Irish, so maybe that's part of my luck. I had a publisher friend read my book years ago, 25 years ago, and she said it's too dark. It's just too dark. People are not going to want to read this. If you want to be a artsy person and live in Paris and have 3 people read your book and go, wow, that's really dark, then that's it. So then I started using humor to take, because I was thinking, like I mentioned, like Sanford and Son. I mean, here's a guy who lives in a junkyard who doesn't have enough money but it's funny, and I think I just started thinking about how can I convey a message of life that's challenging. How do we get through the day? We get through with humor, and so that's why I was attracted to comedy writing. One is I could convey the message in a way that's more palatable. But also I find humor in craziness, and this book is crazy. These people are dealing with very strange things, and their lives are falling apart, and nothing's going right. And I think it's therapeutic for me to write comedy, to say, look, can we laugh about that? As far as how do I write it, I guess I go back to flashbacks of, like I mentioned, the shows I liked and how they took a sad situation and turned it into. Or Alice and I were talking. I don't know if anyone's read Confederacy of Dunces. Just fantastic. My favorite comedic novel. It's if you were to describe this book to someone, they would be like, "That's not a comedy," because it's a sad story about this guy who lives with his mother and he can't keep a job, and it's really, and the author's story is even worse. The author had dealt with some depression and things, and his book was published, but after he died and things. So even the story of the author's life is really sad. So I think I just want to communicate and try to tell a story in a way that it's not too serious, it's not too judgmental, and I don't want to preach in my books. I don't want to tell people right or wrong. I want to just tell a story. I mean, obviously, you can't get away from that 100% because there's a bias in your own writing. But yeah, I use comedy to try and tell a story without being too dark or being too judgmental or being all these other things.
Good.
Does that help? Or
I guess the other thing that I'm not clear of is there out in comedy, different kinds of comedy. I mean, are there labels that you put on comedy that you think you have a label to what you do, or is it very elusive?
yeah, actually, and I didn't pick this label, but everyone tells me as soon as they read my stuff, you're dark comedy. So I was under the impression that dark comedy was always about death. But I think that's kind of expanded. So my screenplay, Crackers, is about an out of work chef and his young wife. His father-in-law dies during dinner, and his mother-in-law, who they don't get along, moves into the house, and there's all this fireworks. So that I understand why that's dark comedy, because there is a death in that movie. But I think it's just because my comedy tends to be very raw and real situations and painful situations that people have labeled it as dark comedy. So there are different comedies. There's dramatic comedy, romantic comedy, fantasy comedy. There's another one too, which I'm thinking of, which I'm the opposite of, which is more of like a 1950s humor where it's very kind of boxy, that it's very everything, like the houses are perfect and the people are dressed nice, and it's very bland no, I shouldn't say bland, that's the wrong word, but it's very straightforward. So mine's considered dark comedy.
Okay, thank you.
I would think that, Tim, your writing is akin to the 2004 movie Sideways, which was, it's one of my favorite dark comedies. We're very intelligent. You've got a guy who's trying to write a novel, and he's an 8th grade teacher, and his life is really, sad. And then his best friend, Thomas Hayden Church, is going to get married, and then they go on the road trip to the wine valley and Sonoma, and chaos ensues, and there's a fight with a naked man. So, and it was just one of the funniest movies, and it's a shame that it didn't get Best Picture. But
and I look a little like Paul Giamatti, so.
And Paul Giamatti, he was in his 30s in that movie, so funny. But it got a raw deal not getting Best Picture. But that was one, I would say, that to me, that's an epitome of a dark comedy, where it had the human story about relationships, and then it was also about the characters, and it was funny, but it was also real, which Jesus's brother James, going back to the book, and these are about real issues of how do you connect with people, how do you manage to have a job and make money, but then also how do you're selling your soul by working all the time, and everybody can relate to that, being a phone addict, and how do you give that up? And what Amber's dealing with, being a woman and in a corporate world and a misogynistic world, and this was written, it was written after Me Too. But I know you wrote it before that. I mean, the book was published after, but I know you wrote it before 2017. But yeah, I think you wrote Amber very well. I think, as a guy writing a woman, I thought you hit all the marks, and she was my favorite character.
She's my favorite character too. And I hate to say it, but to me, she's the smartest character, because she's loose in her, just, she's very thoughtful. She's frustrated and everything else, but the other people feel like more bumbling around and not as thoughtful. So I'm not sure why I try. Maybe it's because there are 3 men and only 1 woman. I don't know, but she's my favorite character too. Probably because I could relate to her and and to the question about comedy. The other thing too is that's how I deal with stress myself. I worked in the corporate world for 20 years, and some of the things I saw were just mind blowing. You sit in a meeting and you either make a joke or you would get frustrated, and so I tend to just start making jokes, and that got me through 20 years of corporate life.
Well,
You're on
we're
mute.
coming to the end of our time together. I just posted our group picture on Facebook and Tim's picture. If you have other things to say to keep the conversation going, it's there on the Facebook, and tag yourselves. I didn't have a chance to do all that, but any other thoughts? And Tim, thank you so much. I love the depth of your presentation with your slides and with showing us the clip.
There's one other question. I think we have 5 minutes. Do you want me to answer that last question?
Yeah, of course.
So Paul is ironically, Paul is the only character that's completely fabricated. All the other characters are based on something else. So I read a book called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim someone. And it's basically, and I pictured Paul is the author of this book, basically, in my mind. Because I read this book thinking, this guy is delusional. I'm only going to work 4 hours a week. I'm going to go to Argentina and drink wine. And, you just do it. You don't think about anything. You just go out. He's one of those books where I read it going, yeah, that sounds great. He probably has an inheritance or something. He's sitting, life's not that easy to just say, I'm going to, now the point of the book is, don't let everything get in the way of your dreams and make time and whatever, that's fine. But that character, Paul, is basically, after I read the book, and actually, if you read the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, there are all these things that he says from, not verbatim, but, paraphrased. Paul's character is going to quit his job and go to Argentina to teach. I can't remember what he's teaching now, but, and that comes right from the 4-Hour Workweek. He talks about, I quit my job and went to Argentina and I learned how to what do they do down in Argentina? They do the, what's that dance they do down there? Anyway, so he tells a story in that 4-Hour Work. Tango, thank you. And so, so I grew to, I know this sounds awful, but I grew to hate the author when I read that book, and I couldn't put it down because I was like, oh gosh, he's so smug and it fit well for this story because you don't like Paul, and I knew people like that. And just one last thing about Paul, the Mike character is actually based on a friend of mine who passed away. He had a tough life, and it was interesting to write that character because everything that could have happened badly, like, he just didn't get any breaks. And he was a guy with gray hair in high school and everyone loved him. And he got married twice and both of the marriages didn't work out, but he was still the nicest guy. And he got this job that was just awful. So I don't know why I just put the two characters together, like this smug, everything works out well for him. he's going to Argentina to drink wine, and here's this other guy who just nothing worked out for him. So when I read that book and I was thinking of Mike the character, that's where I kind of thought, and that's where the connection is with them. They went to high school together. They knew each other. So yeah. So anyway, that's where that character comes from. And I'm glad you didn't like Paul, because I hated Paul. I actually was thinking about like maybe worse things happening to him in the story than getting beat up by Coady. But I did love the scene where Coady does smack him around a little. Again, because you wouldn't think a priest, but if a priest went into the military, he would be able to handle himself.
The karate priest. Those
The
scenes were so
karate
funny with the cops, and then
Yeah.
when the guard when Mike's naked on top of Empire State Building. Just the reaction. Oh yeah, I've seen it all. It's no big deal.
Well, that's actually based on true character too. I was at the Empire State Building because I grew up in New York, so I've been to the Empire State Building. Like I used to live in Hoboken, and so everyone would say, "Hey, take us to the Empire State Building," and so you became like a tour guide. And I would talk to the security guys, and they're typical New Yorkers, like, "Yeah, I've seen everything," and they would tell you like stories. You didn't know if they were true or not, but they would tell you a lot of crazy stories. Great question, Miles.
I was just thinking I could picture Bill Murray in one of those roles.
Yeah, Bill Murray would probably be a good Mike if he was younger. Just the way that Bill Murray walks, and he's kind of a weird, like his demeanor and everything is very strange.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, I taught comedy writing many years ago, and what I found is that everybody has a different version of what's funny, and I thought I'm pretty funny. I get Tim, I get your humor, I get it. I think everything that Bill Murray does is funny, and a lot of people agree with me. But everybody in my class had never seen Stripes. They hardly knew who Bill Murray was. I mean, it was I did I clipped a cartoon of Zitz, which Jeremy is the main character. People didn't know he was a boy or a girl. He's a boy who eats a lot, like my son. The cartoon was that he ate. He asked his mom, "What's for dinner?" And then he says, "Oh, I have time for a snack." She's like, "Oh, dinner is in 30 seconds." He's like, "Cool, I have time for a snack." So, those are the kind of things that were just so funny, and nobody got it. So I had to retool and really, really think. It was a hard lesson. I was like, I don't think I want to teach comedy writing anymore.
Can I bring up Tracy one more time though? Because it's funny, I can never know what my favorite line is, but Kirkus Review for Jesus Brother James, they gave me a great review. It was really great. But there was a line that I'll never forget in the review. It said, "This comedy is not for everyone," which is, it's kind of like saying, that's like saying the sky is blue, right? Yeah, of course, every comedy, but they had to put that in there, that saying this comedy is not for everyone. So, but it's good in a way to warn people.
That's good. All right. Sadly, we're gonna have to shut this down for now. We got the conversation.
everyone.
Keep going on Facebook. Just find us. I posted everything there. Tag yourself, and we'll see you next month, April 30th. And RSVP. Thank you so much, Tim, for your time and sharing your talents with us. It was wonderful to see you, my friends. And hopefully we'll see each other in person.
And follow me, and hopefully we'll be making films around Raleigh soon.
Yeah, and if you need to know Tim's stuff and don't have his information from the chat, which is going to be, I'm going to get this up on YouTube and everything, you can always email me, and I'll get that over to him, okay? All right, y'all have a great day. There's supposed to be some thunderstorms, so stay safe.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.